Greetings! This video is about William Lane Craig and the slippery slope fallacy. Now, you may be wondering, what does William Lane Craig and the slippery slope fallacy have to do with each other? That is the question, which will be answered in this video. I'll start by explaining what I'm referring to when I speak of the slippery slope fallacy. An argument which claims that the first event will lead to further events, which culminates in a final, significant, often undesirable event, but which fails to establish causal links or significant correlation between the events, is an argument which commits the slippery slope fallacy. Often, the slippery slope argument is based on the fact that event B follows with likelihood from event A. That is, that B probably follows from A, and so on. This fails to take into account that multiplying fractions results in a product which is lesser than the factors. An example of a slippery slope argument would be the idea that living a luxurious life often leads to one becoming used to convenience, and that this in turn frequently makes one dislike hard work, which likely means that one is lazy, and being lazy plausibly leads to one living a life of sloth. Sloth has a tendency to breed wickedness, and thus living a life of luxury, more often than not, leads to depravity and evil. The issue with this argument is that while each individual step might seem more plausible than their opposite to some people, this doesn't justify the conclusion, since we don't know whether multiplying the likelihoods together would lead to a result which is over 50%. Let's say that we have a slippery slope argument with 4 steps, but where we give exact probabilities for one event to follow another. B follows from A with 80% certainty. C follows with a 65% chance. D with 75% and E with 70% probability. Now it simply becomes a simple math problem. Will the result, after multiplying all probabilities, be above 50%? 80% multiplied with 65%, multiplied with 75%, multiplied with 70% equals 27.3%. Here we see that even though each step was relatively plausible, the entire chain of events is not. Now I will try to explain what all of this has to do with William Lane Craig. For those who don't know, William Lane Craig is a prominent Christian apologist who is, among other things, known for debating famous atheists and for his trademark Kalam cosmological argument for God. The reason that Craig is in a video mentioning the slippery slope fallacy is because of what he says, discussing what makes a good logical deductive argument in this video, among others.
Dr. Craig, what makes a good logical argument?
Well, what makes for a good deductive argument, I would say, is 3 factors. First of all, the premises of the argument have to be true. Secondly, the conclusion needs to follow from the premises by the rules of logic. And then thirdly, the premises need to have some sort of warrant, some sort of reason or evidence for us to know that they are true. And so I would say that in light of all that we know, in light of the evidence, the premises need to be more plausible than their opposites, their negations. So long as the premises are more plausible than their negations, then the rational man will believe in the premise rather than its opposite. So those 3 factors would give us a good deductive argument for some conclusion. True premises, valid logical reasoning, and premises that are more plausible than their opposites.
To quote the important parts of what Craig says, the premises need to be more plausible than their opposites, their negations. So long as the premises are more plausible than their negations, then the rational man will believe in the premise rather than its opposite. Craig would be right in saying that as long as the premises are true and the logic is valid, then the argument is sound. But here it seems that we must make a distinction between good arguments and sound arguments. Not all good arguments are sound, but more importantly, not all sound arguments are good arguments. A good argument, loosely defined for the purposes of this video, is an argument which is logically valid and for which premises are sufficiently supported as to make the conclusion more plausible. As you probably noticed by now, the premises merely being more plausible than their negations doesn't constitute sufficient support. One must have a certain amount of preferably rationally warranted confidence in the premises before one can rationally claim that the premises make the conclusion more plausible. I have decided to call Craig's failure in deductive logic the plausibility fallacy. It is basically the same mistake that is committed in the slippery slope fallacy. But unlike the slippery slope fallacy, it isn't about an alleged slippery slope of one event leading to another. The mistake lies in thinking that simply because the premises are plausible, therefore the conclusion is plausible, when in fact what is actually true is that the logically warranted support or confidence that the premises of a valid argument give the conclusion is the result of multiplying the confidence or support that the premises have. The reason we need to multiply is that the likelihood that the conclusion of an argument is true is the product of the likelihood of the premises being true. This is the only way of knowing if and how much support the premises give the conclusion. If the result is below 50%, then the argument is not good, and the conclusion isn't supported, since the argument wouldn't provide a rational reason to be more confident in the truth of the conclusion. This is because that if the likelihood of all the premises taken together of being true is not higher than chance, then the epistemic support for the conclusion is no different than before. This is in fact an even more significant error than the slippery slope fallacy, since for the latter, even if the result ends up being below 50%, one might still have been successful in showing that an action or event has a significant risk associated with it. If one commits the plausibility fallacy, then one has simply failed to provide reason for belief in the conclusion, and thus not accomplished anything. Now I will explain why Craig's error is significant. Craig might very well be right in saying that the rational man will believe in the premise if they find it to be more plausible than the negation, although this is certainly something which can be disputed. But if that's the case, then the mere belief in the premise doesn't make belief in the conclusion of a logically valid argument rational. The result of recognizing Craig's faulty methodology when it comes to deductive arguments is that one can dismiss the conclusion of his arguments, even if one finds his logic to be valid and the premises to be somewhat plausible. To put this another way, reasonable faith must overcome reasonable doubt. Let's look at the Kalam cosmological argument as an example of how this causes a problem for Craig. The argument is often presented as follows. Premise 1. Everything which begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2. The universe began to exist. Conclusion. Therefore, the universe had a cause. If one believes the premises with 60% confidence, then the conclusion will only have 36% support. This will be insufficient to justify belief in the conclusion. It may be pointed out that if one is more confident in the premises, say 80% confident, then one rationally must, unless there is contrary evidence, accept the conclusion. This is true, but there are two problems with this, if raised as an objection. The first is that there will always be contrary evidence in arguments, which must be considered together with the supporting argument. The second problem is that this doesn't take into account hidden, or as we soon will see, forgotten premises. These, even if they are plausible, can undo an argument. This is especially true for the Kalam cosmological argument, which I'm therefore tempted to call the Kalam distractological argument. For you probably didn't notice it, but the Kalam cosmological argument, William Lane Craig's favorite argument for God, which was presented previously, never even mentioned God. This is because the argument which was previously presented and often discussed isn't the entire argument as it is presented by Craig. Craig, after having established to his own satisfaction that the universe had a cause, will then proceed to argue that this cause can only be God. He does this mainly in three ways. He argues that the cause must be an incredibly powerful transcendent one. He argues that it must be a transcendent mind, and he argues that it must have free will. It is not the purpose of this video to discuss or refute the Kalam cosmological argument. I am merely analyzing it as an example to illustrate the problem. I will focus on Craig's line of reasoning that the cause of the universe must be a transcendent mind, and thus that we can, as a result of a cumulative case, conclude that this mind is God. I have tried to summarize his full argument as accurately as I can, but I am happy to be corrected on things I have gotten wrong. Let us very generously assume that we are 80% confident in all the premises, and see if we should accept the conclusion. Let us now hear from Craig himself how he argues for his conclusion.
Premise one, everything that begins to exist has a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. 3, therefore, the universe has a cause. Once we reach the conclusion that the universe has a cause, we can analyze what properties such a cause must have. Now, it follows from the two premises of the argument that therefore the universe has a cause. What properties must the cause of the universe possess? Well, by the very nature of the case, as the cause of space and time, this entity must transcend space and time, and therefore exist non-temporally and non-spatially, at least without the universe. This transcendent cause must also therefore be changeless and immaterial, since anything that is timeless must be unchanging, and anything that is changeless must be non-physical and immaterial, since material things are constantly changing on at least the molecular and atomic levels. Finally, and most remarkably, such a transcendent first cause is plausibly personal. The personhood of the first cause of the universe is implied by its timelessness and immateriality. The only entities which can possess such properties are either unembodied minds or abstract objects like numbers. But abstract objects don't stand in causal relations. The number 7, for example, can't cause anything. Therefore, it follows logically that the transcendent cause of the origin of the universe is an unembodied mind or consciousness. We may therefore conclude that a personal creator of the universe exists who is uncaused, beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and unimaginably powerful.
Summarizing and simplifying what we heard earlier, the argument would look something like this. 1. Everything which begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore the universe has a cause, which we deduce from 1 and 2. 4. The cause of the universe must transcend physical reality, that is, the universe. 5. Only abstract objects, like numbers or immaterial minds, can transcend physical reality. 6. Abstract objects cannot be causes. 7. Therefore, the cause of the universe must be an immaterial mind, which we deduce from premise 4, 5, and 6. 8. If an immaterial mind causes the universe, then that immaterial mind is God. 9. Therefore, God exists, which we deduce from premise 3, 7, and 8. As should be clear, the argument is useless unless all the premises can be given proper support, and since Craig only tries to support the first two premises, we have no reason to accept the conclusion. Indeed, anyone having 80% confidence or more in the latter premises would be rare enough to render the argument irrelevant. Obviously, it isn't just the Kalam cosmological argument which must overcome this problem. So what can we say in conclusion? We have seen that Craig commits an error in deductive logic when he tries to identify what constitutes a good deductive argument. We have also seen why this error is significant, since belief in the premises doesn't necessarily warrant belief in the conclusion. Lastly, this has been demonstrated by examining Craig's Kalam cosmological argument. Craig seems to have forgotten the concept of reasonable doubt, but before he can successfully contend with it, he cannot with honesty refer to his belief in God as a reasonable faith.